Hello everyone, welcoming you to Saurabh's classes. And today we are looking at the University of Hyderabad M Economics Entrance Paper 2021, question number 5. So arrange the following in increasing order of income elasticity of demand, right? So number one, luxuries. So if you remember that luxuries are basically defined as those goods whose income elasticity of demand is strictly greater than 1, right? Inferior goods are, if your income increases, then it's negative. And necessities are basically those goods where your demand increases with increase in income up to a certain level, and after that it's not required when the necessary amount of goods are met. So the least is basically luxuries. So this will be the third one in the list, and next it will be followed by necessities. Sorry, the the first one in the list will be inferior goods because it has the lowest elasticity. That will be followed by the necessities, and then we will have luxury. So the order will be 2, 3, and 1, which is option number D over here. And that's the answer to part 5. Now moving on to question 6 of the same paper. So if the current interest rate changes from 5% to 4%, then the market value of the pre-existing bond changes by which of the following options? Now, without going into the actual derivation of the figures, I'm just straight away writing the expression. So the price of the bond is basically given by capital R naught by small r, where capital R naught is basically a fixed payment that is made to the purchaser of the bond for an infinite period of time, and R is the market interest rate. So initially we are saying that the initial market interest rate is basically R1, which is 5%, which is 0.05, and finally the interest rate falls to 4%, which is 0.04. So now one thing is clear, that since R1 was greater than R2, so the bond price in period 1 is definitely lesser than the bond price in period 2 because of inverse relation, or bond price in the present period, that is PB2, is greater than the bond price in the earlier period. So definitely there has been an increase. So the last two options will not be applicable. So with R equals to R1 equals to 0.4, 0.05, the PB1 is basically R0 by 0.05. With R equals to R2 equals to 0.04, PB2 is equals to R0 divided by 0.04. So what is the change in bond price? It is the current bond price minus the previous bond price, correct? So that is basically R naught taken common. So this will be 1 by 0.04 minus 1 by 0.05. So if you just evaluate this, so this will be 0.05 minus 0.04 divided by 0.04 into 0.05. So that makes it 0.01 R naught divided by 0.04 into 0.05. And since the options are given in percentage terms, so percentage change in PB is basically the change in PB divided by the initial price of PB. So that is 0.01 R naught divided by 0.04 into 0.05 multiplied by PB1, which is 0.05 by R naught. So these two will get cancelled. So that makes it 0.01 by 0.04, which is 1 by 4. Take it in terms of percentage and you get your answer to be 25%, which is basically your option number B. in the set of choices. So that's the answer to question 6. Now moving on to the next question, which is question number 8 of the same paper, University of Hyderabad, M Economics 2021. So for a commodity, its demand schedule shifts to the left and its supply schedule also shifts to the left. Then how do the equilibrium price and quantity change? So obviously the best way to answer this question is to draw a diagram and evaluate the changes. So let us draw a standard demand curve, negatively sloped, and continuing with a standard supply curve. So this is your quantity, this is your price, this is your supply, this is your demand, and this is your optimal price P star and the optimal quantity Q star. Okay, so now the first thing that will happen is the demand curve will shift left. So let's push it down and left, D dash. So this basically exerts a downward force on price and quantity, right? So if I just name it, so this is basically P double star and this is basically your Q double star, right? Both are basically falling. And now comes the question of fall in the supply curve as well. So now this, let's understand that when the supply curve shifts to the left, one thing that will surely happen is that the price, so there can be two cases. Let me just illustrate this thing. The first thing is something like this. So this is your supply curve S dash. This is your new equilibrium. So one thing that has happened is the quantity has surely fallen more, but the price has actually increased a little bit. So effectively, this is your fall in price. That means if it were the case that the supply curve would have shifted farther more than the demand curve, maybe in a situation like this, let's say something like S double dash, then this would have been your equilibrium and quantity would have fell by a much larger amount, but price would have actually increased, right? So it, since both the curves are shifting in the same direction, the final outcome on price depends upon the relative shifts of the demand and the supply curve. So the conclusion is that demand shifts left and supply shifts left. So Q will fall unambiguously because the shift, leftward shift of both the demand and the supply are exerting a downward force on Q. So that will fall unambiguously. And you can see that after the fall in demand, when the supply also started to fall, the optimal quantity started falling further. So unambiguously, it will fall. But price, it's ambiguous because it depends upon the relative extent of shift between demand and supply. Like with the example of S dash, as you can see over here with the equilibrium indicated by the red dot, over here the price has actually fallen, the equilibrium price, in comparison to the original equilibrium. But if you have a further shifted supply curve, something like S double dash, then you will eventually find that the equilibrium price has increased. So the Q will fall unambiguously, but the impact on price is ambiguous. So if you look at the option A says that price and quantity both remain the same, no change. That's false. Impact on price is ambiguous, but quantity becomes higher after the shift. The first part is right, but the second part is wrong because quantity doesn't increase. The part C is price goes down and the impact on quantity is ambiguous. This is also not right. So obviously it has to be D, that impact on price is ambiguous, but the quantity becomes lower after the shift. And that's your answer that we can clearly observe by simply drawing a diagram. Okay, so that's the answer to question number 8. So now moving on to question number 10 of the paper. That suppose the government proposes a luxury tax on private jets. The demand for private jets is elastic and the supply is inelastic, at least in the short run. Then the tax burden will fall on. Okay, so without going into much of calculations and all, there was one simple idea that was that you have studied in the chapter on taxes in microeconomics. That is, if the demand or the supply curve is elastic, then the tax burden is less, and the more inelastic it is, tax burden is more. So now you can understand the elastic connotation has been given for demand and the inelastic connotation has been given for the supply. So the suppliers will be bearing the most of the taxes. So the tax burden will fall on suppliers, which is option B of your options. Okay, thank you so much.